Today we're looking at Shakespeare and the Puritans, which is a way of getting at the question that I always wondered as a student, which is if Shakespeare is writing during the time of the rise, which is a way of getting at the question that I always wondered as a student, which is if Shakespeare is writing during the time of the rise of the Puritans, then is there any sense that Shakespeare is aware of the Puritan message, or of the Puritan, at least culture, there in the heart of England? Well, it turns out he does. In one of his earlier plays, Twelfth Night, which was written around 1601, 1602, somewhere in that range, Shakespeare includes one character named Malvolio, who is clearly actually described in the play as being something of a Puritan. Now, if you don't know the play Twelfth Night, it's one of the classic Shakespearean comedies. The play is about two twins, Viola and Sebastian, who are separated by shipwreck. Obviously. Shakespearean plots always have these wonderful twists to start the story. Well, assuming that her twin is lost, Viola decides, of course, to dress as a boy and to go into the employment of a countess, Countess Olivia. And what follows is a bit of a love triangle. Viola falls in love with the Duke himself is in love with Olivia, and Olivia, believe it or not, falls in love with Viola, thinking that she is a man. Now, no spoilers here. The plot aside, the main thing about this play that's important for our talk now is the character of Malvolio. Malvolio is a very minor character. He's a steward in the house of Olivia. Well, believe it or not, he is actually a Puritan. Or at least he's described as a Puritan by the characters there. There is some debate on this. It does seem to be the case that Shakespeare is being a bit playful here. It might be that he is a Puritan, or it might be that he is such a stick in the mud that the characters refer to him as a Puritan, but the point still remains. Malvolio, you see, is cursed in this play to be one of the guys who thinks a great deal of himself, and yet all the characters around him do not think very highly of him. In fact, even his name, Malvolio, is more or less amalgamation of the Latin words mal, which is bad, and volio, which means wanted or loved. We might today translate this as unwanted. Malvolio's name even means that he is unwanted. Well, in Act 2, Scene 3, we actually have a scene where Malvolio has sort of put his foot in his mouth, been a bit of a bozo, and the following dialogue occurs. "Marry, sir, sometimes he is a kind of Puritan. Oh, if I thought that, I'd beat him like a dog." Sir Tony Belch, "What, for being a Puritan? Thy exquisite reason, dear knight?" "I have no exquisite reason for it, but I have reason good enough." And the Maria follows us up. "The devil a Puritan that he is, or anything constantly, but a time-pleaser, an affectioned ass, that cons state without book and utters it with great swarths, the best persuaded of himself, so crammed as he thinks with excellencies, that it is his grounds of faith that all that look on him love him, and on that vice in him will my revenge find notable cause to work." Now, there's a lot going on here. The characters actually come up with a bit of a prank against Malvolio. They convince him that Olivia loves him, that she's hiding it, and that Malvolio needs to somehow come out and express his love for her as well. In the end, he is made fun of. But in this case, you see a lot of different things at play here. First of all, of course, the word Puritan shows up twice, but also the clear esteem of the characters for the Puritan world is pretty obvious. Sir Andrew says if he was a Puritan, he'd beat him like a dog. And the others protest only a bit and suggest that if that is the only reason, why would that be enough? And the response, more or less, is that he doesn't really have a reason, but he still wants to do it. And in the final dialogue here with Maria, you get a bit of a play on words. First of all, she calls him a devil of a Puritan, which obviously is oxymoronic. Puritans are those who wanted a holiness within the church, but here they're being described as somewhat devilish. Some of the language then is a bit complex, a bit archaic, but essentially she says that he thinks so highly of himself, that he is so crammed as he thinks with excellencies. That, again, notice the play, it is the ground of his worship that all that look on him love him. Now again, if you know anything about Puritans, the main beef that they had with the Anglican Church was the order of worship, the ways that things had carried on from the old world, the medieval world, into the Anglican Church. So the grounds of his worship would certainly be an echo to this idea that the Puritans wanted a pure worship. But here she's saying that the actual grounds of his worship, the reality of his character, is that he thinks everyone wants his opinion and loves him. He thinks he's so self-important, he thinks he's so well listened and liked by the community around them that he can say just about anything he wants because his opinion matters. Now, what does this mean? What does all this say about Puritanism? Well, it doesn't say anything about Puritans themselves. This caricature is actually something that will occur throughout history for a long, long time, all the way down to the Scarlet Letter and even the modern English word puritanical, which does not have any positive connotation whatsoever. You might say that here in Shakespeare it's already on display. What this does say is a bit of what's at stake with the Puritan world. You see, because they were fighting their fight and they were arguing their case, but in many ways, in the court of popular opinion, they were losing it. You see, it's one thing to be listened to and to be respected. It's another thing to not be listened to, yet equally respected. But what the Puritans were fighting at this point is that in some cases, and increasingly so as we get into the 17th century, there are some who neither listen to the Puritans nor respect them. Rather, they mock them, come up with characters about what they're like and how they need to be beaten like dogs and these kinds of things. And so what ends up happening is the Puritans have a bit of a Pyrrhic victory on their hands, meaning if they win, they still might lose in the court of public opinion. So why did Shakespeare say this? Why did he do this? Well, probably, salesman that he was, he knew that this would have gotten a laugh out of people. He knew that there were enough in the audience, if not a majority, significant majority, in the audience that would have found this quite funny. They all knew of a caricature of a Puritan as somebody who cared too deeply about his own words and his own thoughts, and so Shakespeare throws it in to get a laugh. But in the end, what Shakespeare leaves us is an artifact of a time long gone before the Puritans left for the New World.
Alright, YouTube, coming on the heels of a somewhat narrow victory for the global communist movement over Hofer in Austria comes actually quite a handy victory, as something like 60% of Italians that voted no on the referendum that they wanted to hold there. The Prime Minister, Renzi, who has resigned, he's out currently, so Italy is currently in a little bit of turmoil. That's to be expected. The referendum that was offered, essentially, was essentially a de facto scrapping of their bicameral system in favor of having just one upper house, sort of a system adopted by Germany and some of these other states in the European Union, in order to get things moving. That what happens currently in Italy, and this is a problem, just that the referendum was draconian and wouldn't have actually solved some of the underlying problems with their economy that people are actually worried about. The problem is that because the Senate there and this upper house share equal power, things get strangulated. We have this problem here in the United States. What have we gone through for the last 4 years? Complete strangulation. Almost nothing gets accomplished. What little does is widely agreed on by the population to be a negative thing, Anytime there's a good idea, it gets repeatedly altered and sent back and forth between the House and the Senate here. It's a problem. It is. But at the same time, Renzi's so-called reform wasn't really a reform. It was an attempt to consolidate more power in the hands of the centralized government that would become even more centralized there. It would become more tyrannical. It would become much easier for them to do basically whatever they want to do, including, and this is probably why they offered the referendum, they were probably leaned on, Renzi and others, by Merkel and Hollande and people like that. Hollande is out, by the way. He won't seek re-election. Marine Le Pen is doing pretty well over there in France. So Italy's joining them. Italy's joining with the French and the British right now. And the Austrians have abandoned them to side with, I guess, the Merkel, the Fourth Reich Chancellor, or whatever the hell you want to call her. But Italy defeated their referendum. Because what this would have done is remove the Senate, essentially, turn it into an advisory body for the most part, and give its actual power to local officials. It would have been great for maybe the EU's establishment. I guess the idea was to crack down on Eurosceptic movements, structure things in such a way that they can use Germany's money temporarily to keep the populists at bay by making it look like things are going well under Italy's economy. But it's not going well for Italy's economy. They're being forced to use currency that's massively overvalued because Germany happens to control the bloc. Germany and soon, hopefully, not France. But these countries with a much higher general productivity in turn are sapping the strength of places like Spain, Italy, and Greece. The thing is, it doesn't work for anybody. Nigel Farage told you this years ago. It doesn't work for the more wealthy nations within the EU. They end up having to dole out much of their productivity to keep the less wealthy afloat. It doesn't work for the less wealthy countries because they're never going to be able to further develop and become more wealthy because they're constantly pegged to a currency that doesn't work for their economic situation. It's strangulated anyway. The Italian people were right to vote no here. And Marine Le Pen, UKIP, and all these other groups, the Five Star Movement spearheaded the no vote in Italy. They're a Eurosceptic movement to the core. And they're all celebrating right now. They're ruining the loss of Hofer in Austria, although it wasn't a crushing defeat. Yesterday, according to the exit polling, it looked like it was going to be. It's actually a little bit closer than that, but unfortunately, Hofer did lose. So Austria will remain a vassal of Germany. Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Basically, it is Germany. It's the same thing. Austria is sort of this weird constructed state that wasn't allowed to reunify with them. They should have just said, oh, fuck it, we're going to have a constant open border situation with the Germans after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's like, who cares about it? Probably convinced people that a Fourth Reich was rising if they ever joined forces, but they are part of the same cultural core. But Italy was right to vote no. This will really harm the EU further. Yesterday it wasn't clear whether it was going to be no or yes. Some people suggested, oh, they're going to vote yes on the referendum because of higher turnout or something like that. Oh, young people are going to save the Euro parties in Italy. Looks like the opposite happened. Looked like they actually abandoned the pro-Euro forces in favor of the Five Star Movement, which is good. So thank you to the Italian people. You've taken the first, rather large also, step in uncucking yourselves, in actually taking back your national sovereignty, which puts you on the side of the UK, possibly of France, depending on what happens in their next election, and forms a much more powerful anti-EU bloc. Now, you don't have to get rid of the EU entirely. You could just reform it, but you'd have to weaken it so much that it wouldn't really be a union of any kind. It makes more sense just to fucking get rid of it, because it's not working for anybody in Europe. Literally, it helps people who aren't from Europe more than it helps any European, because it allows the Germans to allow in unlimited migrants and then divvy them up with other states and then threaten them if they won't take their quota of so-called refugees. It's actually little more than a piggy bank for people like Merkel. Germany's economy is soaring into hyperdrive right now, largely because they get unskilled labor from the third world and from the rest of Europe, and they get to excise money from people, and they dole out pennies in return. It's sort of like the system we have here with welfare. Most of the money that we pay in taxes into the welfare system gets squandered away by bureaucrats either for their paycheck or their pet projects. It never even makes it to the intended recipients. How much less effective and how much worse is it when you have local, national, and post-national authorities all bureaucratically strangulated, working in tandem within the European Union? It's less efficient than our inefficient system. That's the problem. Anyone saying, oh, well, these populist far-right parties, oh, they're going to fuck the poor, they're going to kill minorities, they're horrible people, they're going to, I don't know, there'll be constant wars. If the EU falls, there'll be World War III in Europe. No, there won't. You honestly think that the Germans are suddenly going to invade the Sudetenland again if the EU falls? That's funny. I don't think that's likely to happen. It's funny, these countries, before the EU was actually formulated, these nations seemed to be at relative peace there after the Second World War. The EU forms, things go fine for a while, and then it just gets worse and worse. This is the nature of governments, why it has to be constrained. It's why states have to compete. It's why things have to be reformed from time to time. Governments get too large, too overburdensome in one way or the other, and the state can collapse under that dead weight. Honestly, we see that happening here. It's not we don't have a problem with productivity. We have a problem with the fact that we pay a huge proportion of our productivity funding our ever more burdensome government. And Europe has had extra centuries to build up those burdensome regulations and laws and paper after paper and dictate after decree. It's even worse over in Europe. I'm not surprised things are falling apart over there. You need to dissolve the EU. You need to strongly reform all of your national parties, all of your national legal systems. You need to ban anything like the EU from ever existing again and go back to competing with one another. Friendly? Yeah. Be friends with one another, trade with one another, but also compete. Because these less wealthy economies will then be able to develop. The more wealthy economies won't have to pay out a bunch of welfare to the less fortunate states. Which doesn't even, does it actually get to the impoverished in a place like Italy or Spain anyway? No, it doesn't get to the impoverished. It doesn't help them at all. There are Greek girls right now selling their body for the price of a ham sandwich. So I'm pretty sure the EU's welfare system is not exactly helping the states that are receiving those funds. And I'm pretty sure it's getting squandered on other things that aren't even really necessary. Make those states pay for what they have for themselves. Italy can do much better outside of the EU, just as the UK or France. From the most wealthy to the least wealthy, none of these states benefit from EU membership. You can have travel between European states without a European Union. It's not necessary. You don't have to codify anything. These states just have to come to an agreement. Yeah, they're just not going to require a passport. If you want to cross Germany to France, Netherlands to Belgium, Poland to the Slovakia, yeah, go ahead. We don't care. But to allow one European state, namely Germany, to pump itself full of Islamic migrants and use them as essentially a leverage issue against all other European states on political issues. Oh, well, we'll flood you with immigrants if you don't do what we want you to do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what most people envision the EU becoming, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Pretty sure that's not exactly what, it's probably what the framers had in mind, yeah. They want to build a Fourth Reich. It's quite clearly what they want to do. They want to build essentially US 2.0, which won't work, not in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, you can see the Europeans forming a United States of Europe. They can't even form a currency bloc without things falling apart. So it's good. Italy should leave the EU. France should leave the EU. The UK should definitely invoke their articles and leave. Anyone who's still stuck aboard the EU train when it crashes off a cliff is going to suffer a lot more than what little suffering commensurate comes with leaving it now. That would be my advice. That's about all. Peace out. Alright, YouTube, earlier a couple of people commented that they thought that Mad Dog Mattis would never become the Secretary of Defense, but actually it's been confirmed now he is indeed. Mad Dog Mattis, former head of the U.S. Marines, will be the Secretary of Defense. An important role, and probably one he's well suited for. This is one of the good choices that Trump has made, as opposed to some of his choices are, you know, whatever or tolerable. Some of them are a little more questionable. The idea of putting Mnuchin, or whatever his name is there, as Secretary of the Treasury, you know, former Goldman Sachs partner. My hope is that because he's familiar with maybe the banking complex and Goldman Sachs and all these hedge funds, maybe he knows how fucked up it is, and he'll try to do something about it. He said, oh, well, our first priority is tax cuts. Okay, that's fine. Hopefully that also includes, yeah, let's audit the Fed at the very least, or maybe do away with it altogether. I'm not a gold standard like Ron Paulite when it comes to the economy. Gold is a traded commodity. It wouldn't work for anybody that doesn't know. But the idea of auditing the Fed, I guess, is great. But having Mad Dog Mattis in there, he doesn't need the Secret Service anymore. Just having Mattis around, he's got all of his security right there. I've said before, and I'll say it again, the Secret Service is ineffective, and it's possibly corrupt. We've seen this maybe with JFK, perhaps. It should be disbanded and removed altogether and replaced by a detail of U.S. Marines. They're going to be far more loyal. Our enemies will be far more remiss to try to fuck with our politicians if they're being guarded by the U.S. Marines as opposed to the Secret Service. Let's say Joe Schmo is standing before the White House with a pistol. He really wants to go after the president. Now, in scenario number one, the president's being guarded by a few dozen Secret Service agents. What do we know about Secret Service agents? They like their coke and their prostitutes and their drinking. They're kind of on schedule sometimes, and they don't do a very good job of tackling the fence jumpers. There was some fucking dude, I think he was a Postal Service employee, wasn't he? That built a drone, and he flew into the White House, landed on the White House lawn without being intercepted before they finally got him. He was trying to deliver a letter to Obama or something like that. Can you imagine if there had been U.S. Marines stationed there? Now, he wouldn't have survived the endeavor, and that's really what we need. If we're looking for security for those in executive positions, put the fucking U.S. Marines in there. Let Mattis bring in a couple dozen men who he feels are trustworthy. They've been indoctrinated, literally speaking. They're not made into soldiers. They're made into machines. Their only purpose is to kill things. Put them around the White House. Nobody's going to screw them. You get 1,000 Russian espionage agents trying to march through the gate, they'll all be dead within 10 minutes. It's a great idea. Having Mad Dog Mattis in there as the Secretary of Defense is going to fucking terrify anybody who wants to screw our nation over. Great choice. Couldn't be better. Better than somebody, former Army, former Air Force, whatever. Yeah, that's fine. U.S. military is a great thing. But the Marines are the creme de la creme of that thing, to the point at which you send them in, they lay waste to a region. They probably, they get fucked up in the process, but they don't care. They're dying with a smile on their face. You dope them up with Dexy or something like that, like they did in Vietnam. They're not going to feel any pain. They don't even care. They'll keep fighting even after they're visibly dying. Their guts are hanging out and they're still somehow alive and firing at the enemy. Yeah, get a couple dozen of those in the White House. You won't need to worry about Secret Service anymore. I've pointed this out. Perhaps if the Secret Service had been replaced by U.S. Marines, we wouldn't have had like JFK or something like that. So I think this is a good pick, as opposed, again, to some of his picks that are, a little bit more questionable. Mnuchin comes to mind. Also, like if he chooses Romney for the Secretary of State, or even Bolton, those would be pretty piss-poor choices. Petraeus or Giuliani would be better. Somebody like Flynn or Webb or something like that would be great. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like he's going to do that. They're talking about, what was his name, Porker or whatever. I don't know much about him, but if he's more mentally stable than Mitt Romney, yeah, it'd be an improvement. It's pretty hard to get worse than Romney. Some randomly chosen citizen, you just take a bunch of names, put them up on the wall, throw a dart at them, and choose whoever it is for the Secretary of State, they'd do a better job than Mitt Romney. I will question Trump's capabilities if he chooses Romney for that position. Unfortunately, it looks like he's leaning towards the possibility of choosing him, but Mattis is a no-brainer. Having him in there, it means that you've got a one-man security detail, too. If he's in a public event and Mattis is there, and somebody tries to screw around with the public event, they won't survive. That's good. And then Mattis has a free lunch, too. He can eat the dead bodies once he's done killing people with his bare hands. He'll just twist one person's head off sideways. He'll stab another person with a pencil, right the kidney. Third person, he just chews out their esophagus. Yeah, it's great. You know, he gets a free lunch. The taxpayers don't even have to give him a meal plan, sort of these little cards that we give politicians and bureaucrats so they can eat for free. They get a certain amount on the sort of the taxpayer doll. You won't need that. Just give him communists to eat or something like that. I find it enjoyable to think about the idea of having a competent Secretary of Defense, somebody who understands the military, who understands, I think, as well, fiscal issues. Mattis has come out before and said, yeah, the U.S. military is going to suffer if we keep spending through the nose. We run our economy into the ground. Yeah, it's going to damage the U.S. military. It's actually kind of brave for him to even put his foot out and say these things. A lot of times military dudes, the politicians, if they go against what the politicians are saying, is shut the fuck up, you're a war general, but you don't know anything about politics. He's a little bit like maybe that crazy general from Dr. Strangelove, honestly. But at the same time, it doesn't matter. He could be 80 years old and in a walker, and he could still neutralize 3 or 4 assassins. So yeah, makes sense for Trump to appoint him. Save us taxpayers a lot of money on fence jumpers at the White House. You just have Mattis over to on a sleepover or whatever, and you don't have to worry. You don't even need a Secret Service detail at that point. Just have Mattis wander around half drunk around the Rose Garden, and he'll take care of it for Trump. And he'll love it. He'll have a great time. He'll eat the dead bodies. He'll roast them. He might have to cut down a couple of Washington's cherry trees to do so, but it'll be great times will be had by all, and the entire world will behold, yes, a madman who has been created as a madman by the U.S. military is the Secretary of Defense. Don't screw around with us. It's not a good idea, because this dude may very well decide that you need to get hit by a bunker buster or something like that. Great job for Trump. On this one, I can't find anything, I guess, to complain about. That's about all. Peace out.
Nice one.
A scholar's scholar and a warrior's warrior. Today on Uncommon Knowledge, General James Mattis, USMC. Uncommon Knowledge.
Oh, I did not want to play that one today. I'm so sorry, people. Hold on a second. Someone has entered the lair. Hello, Lindsay. I was just in the middle of looking for a different video because I started to play the very, very wrong one. The totally wrongest one that, well, it wasn't that bad, it was just the wrong one. Damn. How about that one?
Alright, YouTube, for those of you, quite a few, who are Ben Carson fans, I know at least a couple people who wanted him to be the Republican nominee, and while I disagreed, I said, well, Ben Carson's a sleepy man, but he's, one of the more likable people up on stage. Probably one.
Let me just wait for that truck to go by.
One of the more intelligent, even if he doesn't always show it. Let's face it, he is a bit of a religious zealot, but Trump is appointing him to head HUD, Housing and Urban Development. That's something Carson could probably do fairly well. I would have thought more Surgeon General or something like that, honestly, considering his medical background. Maybe he's saving that for Ron Paul or something. I still want to see Ron or Rand in a cabinet position, honestly. I think it would be great to have both of them up there. Put one in as Health and Human Services, the other is Surgeon General, and you're all set. All the younger voters will become GOP members. It'd actually be very funny to see, because the Pauls, they're massively popular among the under 30 demographic, because they're seen as trustworthy. It's not for any specific policies. It's just, hey, we like freedom, and we're not going to lie to you and tell you everything's rosy. Now, Ben Carson, yeah, that's a pretty good pick. Right up there with Mad Dog Mattis. Again, there have been some cabinet picks he's made that I don't even really like. It's like that Nutchin or Munchin or whatever the fuck his name is there, the former Goldman Sachs partner. That's like, I'm not so sure about that. Lin Chow for transportation, don't know enough about her to really care. Carson's good, Mattis is good. We still have to wait and see who the Secretary of State's going to be. If it's Romney, I'm going to grumble about that. I'll give him a chance to prove that he's maybe changed his ways, but I'm not going to have high expectations for a Romney State Department or a Bolton State Department. I wouldn't even have high expectations for a Giuliani State Department or a Petraeus State Department, but it'd be maybe certainly better than Bolton, probably a little bit better than Romney too. I would love it if he just came out of nowhere and blindsided everyone, said Jim Webb's going to be the new Secretary of State, or even Ron Paul, honestly. Ron Paul, Secretary of State, would be hilarious. It'd be great. But I don't think that's the way he's leading. I think we're going to end up with a Romney State Department at this point. Although there are some tales that he's broadening the number of people he's considering. This is after whittling it down to a short list. Put Gingrich in the spot. It'd be all right. Put Marco Rubio in as the head of the State Department. It'd be hilarious. You'd have little Marco jokes constantly. And, he is well-spoken, even if he is on amphetamines, it seems, anytime he speaks to anybody. As for China, we have a second piece of Trump news here, of course. He's continuing to feud with them on Twitter and elsewhere over the Taiwan thing. I'm completely side with Trump on this one. I have no problem with this. If he wants to attack China for attacking him for accepting a fucking congratulatory call, go for it. The Chinese are being too big-headed. They don't seem to realize which nation has more projective force, which nation has more military strength overall, which nation is actually allied with Taiwan. The Chinese still claim it's just a rogue province. Good luck trying to take it back. Good luck. You can fly your nuclear bombers around Taiwan's edge of airspace all you want. It's a meaningless gesture. They're not actually going to do anything because China is not an erratic, non-state actor like ISIS that would actually utilize such weapons outside of a wartime scenario. China additionally has the problem of an increasingly concerned India to its south that also has nuclear weapons, let's face it. Not too happy about the fact that China decided to route some travel and trade through Pakistan, which they have a long-standing feud with. They have to deal with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Bangladesh, some of these Islamic Central Asian countries that don't really like China and think that there are some Islamic provinces there that should be free, the Tibetan revolutionary movements, certain liberal reformers in the coastal regions. China has a lot of problems. There's a reason why they haven't leapfrogged ahead of us. That and the fact that they're 50 years behind on most measures. Their economy is still a paper palace. They have ghost cities, ghost trains, ghost roads that nobody uses because in order to justify their repeatedly re-injected economy, they have to keep building stuff regardless of whether growth is even keeping up with the things that they're building. They build some of these things, they're so substandard they fall over the next day. They've got like that replica of Paris. Nobody lives there. It's basically a ghost town. They have their own fake Eiffel Tower and everything. China has severe problems. And honestly, the future of Asia isn't even in China. It's in India. India is the future of Asia. You may not see it now, but I can see it. India, Vietnam, Thailand, possibly the Philippines. That's the future of Asia. Japan's not the future of Asia. They stalled out 20 years ago. China's beginning to stall out now. Their growth is receding. The cracks in their economy are beginning to show. They haven't actually made up enough lost time on the military end when their economy was booming. They were too busy funding other projects. Building infrastructure is great. Now, the Chinese used exactly the strategy they should have used, which is massively expand infrastructure Energy production, especially solar and wind, important in China. More roads, more rails, terraforming things, putting up dams, everything else that you could possibly need, more docks. That's great. That's really good for China. That certainly did spur a hell of a lot of growth. The problem is they kept building those things because it was centrally planned, and because there was also the mixed economy side where private businesses got a guarantor from the government to build such things and convince the government, yeah, we need a road to this farm. Yeah, it's going to be 5 miles of empty road that will have 1 truck using it, but this will increase the output of this farm. The Chinese government more often than not allows them to do these things because these people just, they pay a $5 to some bureaucrat, they get accepted. That's the problem within their mixed model. So what's ended up happening is that while that original infrastructure development did cause the economy to grow at pace with that expansion of infrastructure, at some point infrastructure began growing far more quickly than the actual output, the actual efficiency of the state. Now they're simply building things to keep building things, hoping that investors will flood in. But the investors aren't flooding in fast enough for them to keep building these things. They're running up debt as a result. Nobody's using it. And because nobody's developing these things, factories aren't going up, farms are not being plowed through and so forth. It becomes empty infrastructure that then they have to fund. They have to maintain. More and more of their economy is used just to maintain what they've already built. They're still building more, and it's inefficient. China's not the future of Asia. I don't care what anybody says. As for Taiwan, there could come a strange day in the future when the communists in control of China, kind of commies, you know, it's a mixed model. It's not straight out communism, it's just a communist party so-called. The self-proclaimed communist in China might end up getting racked with so many domestic revolutions when their economy flatlines that maybe Taiwan ends up inheriting the entirety of mainland China. Has anybody thought about this possibility? That liberals might rise up in some of these urban and suburban zones in China, overthrow the government at some point, institute a more liberal policy and seek reunification under the type of government Taiwan already has, and maybe even recognize their premier there as, yeah, he's the de facto interim leader. We're going to have an actual election, and obviously it probably won't be some Taiwanese person that actually ends up as the head of that. But yeah, we're liberals now, we're giving up the mixed model, we're going to a private marketplace and so forth. They've pumped their market's so full of people's pensions that it's surprising that people haven't already held a small-scale revolution in China. And they got the Hong Kong problem, the Tibet problem, everything, and all sorts of problems. So I wouldn't be confident. I wouldn't be investing in China right now. I'd be investing in India or Thailand or something like that, or maybe Pakistan. Pakistan has seen enormous growth as well. They especially on the end of textiles, anything related to, you know, coats and clothes and things like that, blankets. It's moving from Egypt to Pakistan right now at quite a steady clip, so pretty good economy there that's actually booming. I mean, it's limited to a few urban areas. The outlying areas are still nothing more than third world step, but it's beginning to develop at a more rapid pace. Pakistan and India collectively together, if they ever united, would have more power than China can ever have. So yeah, if Trump wants to adopt a line of, yes, we're pro-Taiwan, this is our ally, we're already selling them weapons, so we're going to talk to them. Who the fuck is China fooling? What are you going to do about it? To block us from moving to and from Taiwan? It would be very, very funny to see the anemic Chinese Navy attempting to do that. It would be very, very funny indeed to see them dick-wag a little bit and threaten to launch a nuclear weapon only to get firebombed in response. I'm not anti-China. I have no problem with the people of China. I don't even care if the government of China is communist, but for them to meddle in another nation's friendly affairs. They're not complaining because we're invading somebody. They're not complaining because we're bombing somebody. They're complaining that our president-elect took a phone call from the Taiwanese prime minister. That's where the problem is. Go ahead and complain all you want. If the U.S. government is invading some third world nation, I'm going to be complaining too. But if we're just talking in a friendly manner to a country that's made it clear, we're sovereign, no, we're not dealing with commies, we're not dealing with the so-called government of China, we are the government of China, that's our decision. That has nothing to do with the Chinese. Why would we want China to reabsorb Taiwan and break through all containment and have another giant military base, which is what they'd turn it into anyway? Why would that benefit anybody else in the region either? It's not just the U.S. It's all the other Asian states, including other supposedly communist nations. There's a reason why Vietnam, whose own model is startlingly close to China, no longer wants to deal with China. They'll trade with them, but they constantly bicker at sea over maritime borders, fishing rights, energy extraction, and everything else under the sun. Well, why could this possibly be? Could it be that all these large Chinese fishing vessels keep ramming everybody else's ships out of the way for no reason and bullying them around and spraying them down with water hoses for absolutely no provocation because they think that the entire Pacific happens to be theirs? Yeah, that's probably why. It'd be funny if they tried to do that to a U.S. vessel, see what the response would be. I mean, who cares if Trump wants to take a call from Taiwan? He should call them back up and have an hour-long conversation with them while praising Shanghai Shek. That's what he should do. Oh, that would piss China off so much. And then he should call up the Vietnamese and be like, fuck the commies over there. You should embrace westernization fully. I'm going to pump you full of money too. Then he should call up Duterte. I know he already spoke with him in the Philippines. Be like, oh, you want some really cool weapons? Here, have a couple of these planes. See what they can do. And partner with them. Do the same. Give the Japanese and the South Koreans anti-air platforms. Yeah, we should give them some of these THAAD batteries that they've wanted so bad for so long. And give them more of them. Build like 1,000 of them and just station them all around Asia. Give them to India too. Hey India, you want some free stuff? You don't have to pay anything for it, but we want a trade deal out of you. That'd be great. Use our wallet. Just ring the Chinese. Now this is something Clinton actually openly suggested. I'm not suggesting, oh, kill everybody in China, overthrow the regime. I'm suggesting that we maintain our relations with everyone. We recognize the sovereign states we recognize. We speak to them as we want. And we shouldn't care or take any token if another state, just because it happens to have nukes, doesn't want us to talk to some other state. Because it's crazy. It would be a display of the utmost weakness for the United States to bend over right now and say, okay, we're sorry, China. No, we shouldn't apologize at all. Not even a little bit. That show of weakness would tarnish Trump's entire presidency. It would be almost suicidal for him to apologize to China. He should threaten them more. He should browbeat them some more. See who backs down first. It probably isn't going to be the much larger economic and military power with 10 times as many states within its alliance. It's going to be China that backs down. Their economy's reliant on selling us crap anyway. That's about all. Peace out.